All right. Well, my clock reads 6 straight up. So we will get rolling with this episode of the Boardroom Series. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Bonnie McEwen with the Northwest District Office. And tonight I'm joined by my pal and frequent presenter, Becky Heil.
Hey, everybody. I am the district consultant in Southeast. I recognize a few of my library peeps here, so welcome and thanks for being here tonight.
For sure. The registration numbers showed us 81 people had registered through Iowa Learns, and we know that there are several libraries out there that are enjoying watch parties tonight. So let us know in chat if you haven't already, if you have several who are gathered together in your library watching this together. I love when that happens. I think it makes these programs so much more social. So we're glad you're here tonight for this topic called Pay It Forward, Easing Staff and Board Transitions. You know, as Becky and I were talking about the track we wanted to take with this program, we talked a lot about the frequency of turnover in the library director's position. Actually, there is frequent turnover in many key positions in the library. This is very common in Iowa. Just to give you an idea, in 2022, all 6 of us district offices counted about 85 new directors statewide. Now, granted, Iowa has a great many public libraries at 542, but still 85 is a big number. It feels like a big number to us, and that's just in 2022. And I know that in Northwest, about 3 of the people who were new in 2022 have already resigned. So it's the constancy and it's the frequency of turnover. We can always expect to lose certain positions, certain people in key positions. And some of those will be expected if you someday learn from your library director of her impending retirement, maybe 5-6 months from now. That can be a great opportunity even then to grab a hold of some of these ideas we have for you in easing transitions. If you know of directors who are retiring in the coming months, you have the luxury of time to review your personnel and hiring procedures, to bring together the documents that will be most useful to you. Probably a fresh job description would top that list. So that gives you the luxury of time. But we also know that there are sometimes people who leave the library very unexpectedly. I know in Northwest, we were saddened by the sudden deaths of 2 library directors in the last 5 years. So that happens, and I know Becky has experienced that too. And there can also just be people who leave to take other jobs with very little notice. So this turnover in library land is something that all of us talk about at the state library, and Becky and I thought it would be a good discussion to have with all of you because we believe there is a role to be played with everybody on the library team, from the director to the staff to the library board, and to those of us on the state library staff who can help ease this transition as well. So we want to talk about what we could do in terms of practices and strategies that would help make some improvements. Maybe we can arrive at some better access to much needed documents. Maybe you'll hear some ideas tonight about how to tame the paper trail with maybe more techie trails. That would be cool. What can we all do differently in terms of staying on top of program deadlines, actually knowing what programs your library is participating in, we think is an important thing for library boards to know about. What about keeping track of logins and passwords? That's an interesting proposition. and one that we feel can probably use improvement everywhere, including ourselves, I will say. So that's where we're headed. We want to share with you what we think will be a very useful document as you continue to talk about this at your library, and that's a pay it forward checklist. We'll talk about that annual cycle of programs and deadlines. We'll talk about some things that boards can do to ease the transitions for themselves when there are new trustees that are appointed to the board. And we really want to come back at the tail end of our time together to just ask you what you think will make sense for your library operation. So as you look at this cute little baby with what I think is about the most Scottish name ever, this is Quinn McEwen. But I will confess he's not a baby anymore. I just can't bear to let go of this picture. Quinn McEwen is now 8, and he would probably be slightly embarrassed if he knew that I was talking about him like this. But it's my story to ask you tonight if you want to use the chat space to tell us what you wished you knew. This might be especially true of those of you who are directors or library staff in the audience tonight. What do you wish you knew when you were newly hired? Is there something you felt was missing in your training package? Was there something you felt was missing, maybe even from the state library's perspective? Becky and I would love to hear that as well, because we are, as I said, we're always talking with our colleagues in the other districts about how we can improve upon our conversations with new directors. So I'll give you a minute to think about that and chime into the chat space. And then we'll see if some of your answers match up with some of the answers that I have received from Northwest Libraries.
It's a shy bunch tonight.
Well, there comes one, though, that says, if this is Deb, that says she didn't realize how many responsibilities. Yeah, director responsibilities, I presume. Yeah. And John says the staff says the job is far different than anticipated. I think you're right, John. I think it is a surprising for newly hired directors and staff too. And I like the word you use, universal, because I'm convinced that's true. These are universal feelings and experiences. One of you said, I wish I knew where things were filed. There's a good one.
Or maybe if they were filed.
If they were
Do
filed.
Those documents even exist? And if so, where?
Roberta says passwords.
That's one of Bonnie's favorite things. You're going to hear about that later.
You are. I even have a slide about that. So Brenda can chime in when the time comes. She will see herself in my slide. Reports.
Record keeping.
Yes, reports and record keeping. Yes. But look at what Sandy says. She's working on getting things pulled together for the next director. That's awesome. Well, thank you guys for sharing that. And as John said, I think these are universal truths. These are universal feelings. I asked this very question in prepping for tonight and in prepping for another program I did last month. I asked this question of about 12 or so newly hired library directors. They were new-ish. They were new enough to remember what it was like when they were newly hired, and still they've been working at the job long enough to be able to to be able to say what they wished they had found on site or what they wish they had experienced. And here you see some of those very things that you answered in chat. I wish I knew about the annual expectations and deadlines. I wish I had come into an organized office, right, with organized files and desks and cabinets. I wish library colleagues had reached out to me. I think that one is especially significant. And several people said, I wish the board had taken a more active role in helping me. So Becky and I wanted to be sure to include some ideas for all of you out there who are library board members. And we acknowledged to each other, so we'll acknowledge that to you tonight as well, that this is kind of a tricky proposition for library boards because we don't want you guys to, fall into micromanaging. We know there are a lot of programs and deadlines and reports to be filed, and Becky and I aren't suggesting that you become the ones to file them or to complete those reports, but we do think there's a role to play even in just raising awareness about the programs that your library is participating in. The fact that many of those programs have annual renewals that are expected, like accreditation, for instance. There are consequences if a library misses the deadline for reaccreditation or to turn in the standards report. There are certainly consequences if a library doesn't renew itself as a Bridges member, right? So there are those things that just by raising awareness and maybe developing some kind of a checklist, maybe library board members will be more familiar with those programs and better able to share those programs and deadlines with the new people they hire. The one I see on the slide there that always makes me feel sad is the feeling expressed that the overwhelming feeling was lonely. That got my attention, let me tell you, when that one came through. So I think we can all maybe collectively find a role to play, a part to play in these staff and board transitions. So that's where we're headed, but you'll always find us connecting standards to the topics we offer in webinars and workshops. There are a few standards that connect to staffing changes and orientations. There you can see standard number 7, that's required at a tier 1 level. That requires library boards to have a personnel policy. There are so many things that can go into a personnel policy, but for our purposes tonight, probably the thing that would top your list in terms of staffing changes will be updated job descriptions. And maybe your template or the format you use for job evaluations, because some libraries do have a practice, and in fact, some cities have a practice. Well, they'll do a 6-month evaluation on new hires. So that may be something that your library does. Those would be 2 important personnel documents to have at the ready when you know there's a change coming. And then look at standard number 25, which is required at a tier 3 level. The library has a planned orientation program for all new employees, so we'll underscore all there because that includes your library director as well. There's actually another standard that we'll talk about and remind you of that requires an orientation for new trustees. So we have more on that coming up. Well, as my slide caption says here, there are learning curves and then there are learning curves. I will confess that I've used this phrase, hundreds of times. When I'm meeting and greeting new directors, I will hear myself saying, this is a surprising job, isn't it? I bet you didn't know everything that was going to be asked of you. This is a big learning curve, isn't it? I've said that a time or two, and I've said it to countless people, but over the years, I've come to see that there really is more nuance to this because there are learning curves and then there are learning curves. I think there are long-term There's long-term learning that takes place over time, but there's also short-term learning, and that's what we're really focused on tonight, is what we can do collaboratively. Here's what I mean by long-term, short-term. You know, in so many Iowa libraries, new directors come to their jobs without formal education in library science, whether it's an undergrad degree or a graduate degree like an MLS degree in library science. And so many people come to these jobs in libraries from 100 different occupations, but often with not prior library experience, which means that they're bringing a wonderful skill set to the jobs that can translate to life in libraries, but it's not specific to the principles of the library profession. And I think that takes time to develop. It does just take time and exposure to the principles of the library profession to understand and to internalize those things like patron confidentiality and what's really so important, and that's the defense of intellectual freedom. Also understanding how city government works, understanding how your city library fits into its city government. Understanding how libraries are funded is another one that really that knowledge comes over time. Your new directors aren't going to take these jobs immediately knowing these things. And I think that's a real advantage of having the education team at the state library that can help with this kind of long-term learning. There's also community organizations that may be in your towns, but increasingly what we're finding are people who are hired to work in a library, but they don't necessarily live in that town. They may commute from a town 5 or 10 miles away. So then it takes more time to learn about the workings of the community, the organizations, the civic groups, the social groups. That's the long-term learning, but it's the short-term day-to-day learning that for me, that's where the immediacy comes into play. That's where we want our new hires to be able to have ready, easy access to needed documents so that every day isn't a scavenger hunt. That just adds to the stress of taking on a new job, right? It's important to know that annual cycle of programs and deadlines, and it's important to know who are the people out there who are available to help. Certainly your own board members, your staff members, but I hope you'll put state library staff in that list as well. I want to pause here at this point, Becky, for any chat that's come through, any comments about any of this or anything you want to add before we move to our real payoff piece.
That's right. The part that's coming up is what you're all doing here tonight. I haven't seen anything come through chat except for a couple of people who said as they're thinking about learning, they are working on a calendar and notes for the next person. So thank you guys. That makes our job easier. We have all 6 of us do what we call a new director orientation, where within the first week, month, or 6 weeks, we try to meet with the new library director and let them know about those programs. But we can use your help with some of that. During those 6 weeks, they are more than welcome to contact us and ask questions, but a lot of times a new person doesn't know what they don't know. So for you to be there as trustees out there kind of helping them figure out the types of things that might be coming up, that's what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to hear that some of this is already happening.
Yeah.
All right, well, here's the payoff. Here's the piece that we want to share with you in hopes that this will be something that will be useful to your library as you take this discussion back to the rest of your board at a future meeting. Share with them what we talked about tonight and talk about your role to play in pulling together these things on a pay it forward checklist.
So this will be available to everybody who is in I Will Learn. So if you are not, you'll need to contact Bonnie or I to get a copy of this, but it will be one of the attachments that you can get through the I Will Learn's continuing education catalog. It's more than what's on the screen right here. We're going to look at the pieces a little bit at a time. We'll also have the slides available for folks if there's anything on there that you would like to think about or to use, like Bonnie said, with the rest of your board members. So really, this is kind of the big deal. Bonnie and I have done a version of this in a variety of formats across of other venues, and I think this is the part that's really exciting and really helpful for folks. As we're going through this, if there's anything that you say, "Oh man, I wish we would have had," if this would be on that list, it's something that I missed, let us know. We're happy to add things to this list as well. So you see up at the top, it says the goal for this checklist is that it's electronically accessible. I heard some of you comment in the comments tonight that I don't know where stuff is filed. It might be in a binder somewhere, those passwords or the daily opening and closing procedures. But as a trustee, you may not even have access to some of those. So wouldn't it be great if there was a place online, a Dropbox, a Google Drive? Bonnie's going to talk in a little bit about life binders. Wouldn't it be great if there was a place that all of the board members had access to these types of documents? So we've got them broken down into a couple of categories. The first one is the basic day-to-day operating things. What do you do to open the door? Do you flip the sign? Where are the light switches at? Who's got the keys if you get yourself locked out, or if nobody gave you your keys on the first day? I actually know there was a library consultant who said he got a phone call on somebody's first day and they said, "I'm standing at the front door and nobody gave me a key." Luckily he had one and he ran it over to them. There's lots of those operating things, and that tends to be what we think of when we think about sort of that training that comes for a new employee. But it's things like, what are the interlibrary loan instructions? Is the filing cabinet labeled so you know where things are? Logins and passwords. Like I said, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. I think that's it for this one, Bonnie.
Okay, Becky, before we move on, I
Yeah.
wanted to suggest this to the crowd. We don't usually tell you or expect that you will take notes, but on this checklist you might want to, because just jot down some of the subtopics under our big categories. I think we have 8 of these categories. And the reason I say this is because we want to hit you with a Zoom poll when we've shown you all of the checklist. And that way, when you answer the Zoom poll, you'll be better able to go through your notes to see if these categories would be helpful to your library. Okay, that's all I needed to say. And here's the next part.
So 2 more of the categories. Human resources, big piece that a lot of library directors didn't know that they were going to have to know, and maybe more than what Board of Trustees thought they were going to have to be doing. So be thinking, especially if you have a new director or a director transition, but also if you have other staff transitions, a policy manual. What are the policies at the city level? And then what are your specific policies for human resources? What kind of performance evaluations? Bonnie talked earlier about job applications or job descriptions. When your director leaves without any notice for whatever reason, I mean, that happens occasionally, do you all have access to those job descriptions? Are they up to date? Where are they if you have access to them? That's going to be really, really critical for you as board members. So be thinking about those kinds of things when you're looking at the human resources part. And then some of the sort of basic board things. How does it work in our community? How do we recruit new board members? It's generally spelled out specifically how boards get appointed, typically by the mayor and with the city council's approval. But Do you get to suggest names to the city council? Do they just come up with them on their own? Is there a form that people have to fill out to be on the board? We recommend that, but if they want to be a board member, is there a form that the city has for them to fill out? What are those practices for your community? Board notebooks. I love when you have everything together, maybe a couple of months worth of previous minutes, you've got budgets, and as a new director, they can hand that over to the new library board member. It's really great going the other way too. If you've got that binder, it's really helpful to hand that to a library director and say, here's the things that we have that make our job easier, so that they can sort of pick up on some of those as well. And we're going to talk about calendar a little bit later, I think. I think that's it for this one. Building maintenance. I actually sort of think about this one just sort of what Susan was talking about earlier, and that's sort of facilities. What are all those pieces that are in there? Do you have an inventory? Does your city require an inventory? Whose job is it to keep that updated when you get that new table or you bought new furniture for the youth room? Where does that go? Who has that copy? Who keeps the most official copy? Is it the city that's got it? Who's got that? Frequently, a city will ask you, because they're going to be insuring the contents of your building, and so they'll ask you for an equipment list or an inventory of some type. Think about things like a safety inspection schedule. You don't want your new director to be surprised when the fire department shows up one day to talk about taking a look at their fire extinguishers. So if you've got those types of lists in place, make sure that a new person that's coming in knows that and where they are and how to get them. One of the things I didn't mention when we first started looking at this, you'll see on that right-hand side there's sort of a yes and a no checklist. So that's what Bonnie was talking about earlier. Be thinking about that. Do you know where those things are? Do you have those things for building maintenance? And then we're going to ask you to kind of think about that and give us some answers in a little bit. Policies and planning and budget. Three huge pieces. In fact, 3 of the 5 primary roles of a board of trustee are right there in that headline: policies, planning, and financial management. So again, where are they? New library director comes in, make sure they have access to the policies. You don't want them to be sort of spinning their wheels as they start working with the public there. And one of the things that you'll see second from the bottom there is the disaster response plan. We have something, we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, but we have something to make your job with that a whole lot easier. So be thinking about these. Do you have them? Do you know where they are?
All right, and here are a few more categories. Technology issues. Is there a computer maintenance schedule, or is there a schedule to replace your computer hardware? How do you go about upgrades? Wireless access instructions. Let me pause there just to say that it always surprises me when I'm at libraries and I'm meeting with new directors, and sometimes I can be there to be doing a presentation at a board meeting. But this has happened really quite often to me, that because there are new people in place, they get tripped up by not knowing the login and password to the library's wireless network. There's a secret code for you, but that's a secret code that should not be quite so secret. That should be readily at hand, especially for, I come with my laptop, as does Becky, but I get why it would trip up new staff, because staff come to the work every day and they're using the library's computers. They're not necessarily bringing in their own devices, but guests are, and other patrons quite often are bringing in their own devices, their own laptops. So that's something that I think that's something that really hits with me, because I experience that pretty often.
And I'm going to throw a really quick comment in there. You don't need a password.
Oh,
If
right.
you can do away with a network wireless password, do it. It's not something that we recommend at the state library. But Bonnie is right. There are times when there is a password for you to get on, maybe to the staff one. And if nobody knows it, it doesn't do anybody any good.
Yeah, that's a point of added stress that we've experienced in our travels, right? The category of program participation is, again, one of the key reasons why Becky and I have done this program in a number of different venues, places, in person, workshops, webinars, in state and out of state, I think we have. But it's this program participation that leads us to what leads us to include this is how often we work with our new library directors and staff who are just so uncertain of what programs their library participates in terms of state library sponsored programs. We won't be much help in terms of other resources and databases that your library maybe subscribes to that's not offered through the state library, but things like the summer reading program. Is your library a part of the statewide summer reading program? And if so, certainly your new youth services person would need to know that, right? And your new director would need to know that as well. How do they get a hold of that manual? That requires a login and password. Is that a known thing? New directors will often learn from us about how their library is participating in the standards program in Rich, Iowa. They will often learn from us that the library is a recipient of the Iowa Shares statewide delivery system, and whether or not they're a HooFi customer. So, and whether they're a Bridges library. I mean, a lot of these state sponsored programs, certainly those of us on the state library staff can clue people in to that, but we still maintain that there ought to be people locally who also know these things and who also know that their library is fully accredited or at what level their library is meeting standards. There needs to be people locally, whether staff or board members, who know that the library is a Bridges library. And the fact that you have to renew your participation in Bridges every March. You have to file a accreditation report every 3 years. That happens in February. Your annual survey is due every year, and that happens in October. So we are certainly happy, and we are very accustomed to acquainting our new managers with these things, but we're just asking for your help in raising your awareness about these things as well.
Really quick, Bon, I have a
Yeah.
technology one too that I thought of when I was working on this afternoon. I had somebody come in to help me as we were doing an inventory on some of our technology, and they put together a technology map. And so it talked about, here's where the internet comes into our building. Then it goes into a
Oh,
server room where there's a
interesting.
switch. And then from the switch, it gets dispersed out, and it goes through a wireless access point. We have 3 wireless access points in our building, and they're here, here, and here. And then those go to our computers. This is where we have the printers located. That's also, and a network map can be super helpful if you come into that job, especially when stuff is up in the ceiling and you don't want to be crawling around up there to figure out where all those pieces are. So that is something I would add to this, is a network map. And it's not difficult for anybody to do. If you're the one who put that stuff in there, just make sure it's all mapped out as to where it is.
Wow. That is a wonderful addition to that. That's the first edit we'll make on our pay it forward checklist. That makes me think though too of the HVAC systems, right? And all of that jazz. Very good. So we just are urging you to be mindful that your new hires won't know this stuff on day one. This is a combination, I suppose, of long-term and short-term learning curves. And the state library staffers, those of us who are at the district offices, are happy to help with those learning curves. But we know that we can all do better collaboratively. Here's our last category, and that is category number 8, your contact lists. Think of it as who you're going to call. This is your Ghostbusters list. You will have a listing of all of your board members, whether paper or online, all of your staff members. Friends and foundations is a handy list to have, as well as vendors. That's another thing that so many of our new directors call us about. And if it's a product or a program that the state library provides, we can handle those questions. But if it's something that is outside the purview of the state library, it's going to be harder for us to make those connections with vendors. City and county contacts are going to be so valuable, and maybe we should have topped the list with state library staffers, but no, you guys locally are the ones to be at the top of the local contact list. But just do be sure to share with your new hires the people in each district who are standing by and ready to help as new people take their jobs. All right, this is where the opinion poll comes into play. If I can find my button.
All right, so while Bonnie is looking for that, I want to tell you what we're going to ask you about. Think about those categories. They were operations, HR, board business, facilities, policies and budget. Oh, rats, I can't read my handwriting on that one. Programs, rats. Oh, the participation in programs and technology. It says tech. That's what I couldn't read. Thank you. And then the contact and the names of people to contact. So of those 8, the poll is going to ask you, which of those do you need the most at your library? Which do you think are the most important? Which ones maybe don't you have? You know, it's important and it's something that you never thought about before. Which are the ones that you know about? So be thinking about that as you answer the poll as it comes up. Which are the ones that you think are most needed at your library? And I don't know how to do that, Bon, so it's up to you.
I do. I just have to find the right one. In dress rehearsal, it came up right away, but now, of course, it didn't. But
Of course not.
This is the one, and it should be open. This is the Pay It Forward checklist of priorities. So the categories that we just shared with you are displayed below. So go ahead and check those categories that you think you would like to go home and talk more about. Maybe this requires a deeper discussion. Maybe some of those things you feel that you have aced and you already have all of that stuff well in hand. Maybe there are some things, as Becky said, just never thought about.
And why am I not surprised building maintenance and technology are the top 2? Not a
Well,
surprise at
if
all.
that continues to be the case, you guys are gonna give us both gold stars when you see the next checklist that we're going to share with you.
Ooh, contact lists. That's coming up there now too. Yep, technology is still at the top. Maintenance is dropping a little bit. Policies, planning, and budget. I haven't done one of these in a long time, Bonnie. Is when you do the end poll, will it give us the final results?
Yes.
Cool. All right.
Yes.
Then I can start my running commentary. Oh, technology just took over again.
The only trick is knowing when to end the poll, but we've got 30 people who have grabbed hold of the mouse and clicked their answers, 31.
I think technology is on top of things. And contact lists. I think that's most important. So I'm not sure if that was checked because you all thought it was most important because that's part of the question, or if it's something you think, oh, maybe we didn't do that so well.
Oh, we doubled up on in the question.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's
all
what
right.
you're not supposed to do. You're not
I
supposed
know.
to offer two answers in the same question. But maybe here's what I'm thinking. Because you all live where you live, you all know who you are. so maybe you feel like you know who you are. You don't need to have a list of who you are and who your fellow board members are or who the staff members are, but that could be one reason for that.
That could be.
Well, we are at 76% of the audience who has weighed in
Cool.
on this dopey, less than scientific poll, may I say. The cardinal rule of doing one of these polls is not to throw two answers into one question, which it didn't dawn on me until just now.
That was my question, so we're good. And
I'm
John,
gonna,
I
yeah,
wonder if you're right, the size of the library and thinking about the technology as the number one. I think that the smaller you are, the harder it is to keep up with all that kind of stuff. That could very well be.
agreed. There may not be somebody either in City Hall who can lend a hand in
Right.
terms of IT support. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So what are y'all seeing now?
We see it. We're good.
Okay.
So, yep, technology at 61% is top of the list. And then it looks like there's a pretty big tie. Operating, HR, building maintenance, and contact lists all kind of came in second.
Policies came
Oh, did I miss one?
Policies came in second, and then those ones that you
Oh,
said are
sorry.
all at
Okay.
36%.
Oh, yeah, I missed that total.
Those
That
were all
48.
tied for
Yep, for third, not second.
board business. Look at that. Look at that. You know why that is? Because of the Boardroom Series. That's why that is.
That's right. Y'all know what you're supposed to be doing there.
That's because you're faithful followers. All right. I'm going to stop sharing and go ahead and in chat or with your mics, go ahead and add anything you'd like to add to your to this poll that you took, to your observations about what you think might be most useful to go back and talk about at your library and work toward. We have time for that.
Can I just say, I was just taking a peek over here at the names to see if I've missed folks here. And Christy is doing this outside. How lovely would it be to be out
Oh,
this evening doing this instead of sitting in my boring old office?
yeah, if it's not raining on you.
Well, that's true. We have
That
beautiful
would,
weather here.
it's very cloudy and gloomy here tonight, so we could be getting some rain. We did this morning. Anything you guys want to add to this? Any observations or questions or commentary about the Pay It Forward checklist?
Yeah, John, documentation. We preach that all the time. And that's actually going to come up in the next thing we're talking about. At least I think it is. I don't have my pages numbered. I don't know a little bit yet.
And look at Becky. Allison said she loves your idea about a technology map. I wouldn't know how to do a technology map, frankly. So who would do such a thing for the library? Your internet provider? No?
I doubt it, but I don't know if any of them would. Maybe some of the local ones would. But the person who set up your server, if you've got that, the person who wired your building when you got that done, you can do it. Figure out first where the internet is coming into the building and
Easy
then
for you to
start
say.
following wires. Well, your internet provider will be able to tell you that. Where is it coming into your building at? Is it
Okay.
coming through a radio transmitter? Is it coming through a cable? DSL or fiber, where is it coming into the building at? And then just start looking at all those pieces of equipment that are in there. You just sort of follow those wires and figure out where all that stuff is.
That's cool. But Allison also says she's married to the technology director of their community schools. So no
Yes, she
worries.
is.
No worries.
I just met him the other night, as a matter of fact.
She's taken care of.
That's right. And to
Any?
be perfectly honest, it was my brother who did it for me when I was working at the library. He's an
Yeah.
IT specialist at the University of Iowa, and he set up our network for us. And he was the one who suggested, this map would be a great thing. And it was fabulous. Had the equipment, the serial number, the map with where it all was. It was an inventory and map all in one. It was great.
Well, very good. Well, thank you all. My IT degree kid tells me to Google her way toward every answer. Oh, that's swell. Well, thank you all for playing our game. I want to ask you, as you look at this photo on the right, what do you think this is? In staffing transitions, this problem repeats and repeats. What do you think this is? Any guesses?
Usernames and passwords.
It is. Yes, it is. And this photo is thanks to Brenda Clausen with the Hospers Public Library. And this is with her permission. In fact, she took the picture. In fact, she came at me when we met for her new director orientation. She came out of her office with this spiral bound notebook, flipped open the cover and said, "Look at this. How am I to make heads or tails of this? These are my logins and passwords." And we laughed and we cried at the same time. And she so kindly sent me a picture and has been totally cool with me using this example ever since. Logins and passwords. I think it is the most common challenge for newly hired people.
Hey, Bonnie, do you want the updated version of it?
Yes, what's the
Okay.
updated
I
version?
will. I'll send you the updated version in a few minutes, in a week or so.
In a photo? In a photo, you mean?
Yeah, in
Or
a
a
photo.
link?
Yeah.
Or
So
a
then
link?
you can show that. So then you can show the beginning and what it actually became.
Perfect. I will have a before and after. Perfect. Thank you, Brenda. Well, this is just a nod to the advantages of password managers. If you're not all using them, you might want to grab a hold of one and start using it tomorrow. You'll be glad you did. The best thing I ever did for myself is years ago to start using a password manager. There are lots of them on the market for sure. The one I use is LastPass, but there are many others to choose from. Most of them have free subscriptions. Nearly all of them you can upgrade to a paid subscription if you need to. But using these, I believe, have become in more common practice. Go ahead and use your chat space if you want to share with us the password manager you're using so we can learn about some of these products. I mentioned LastPass. Dashlane is another one. But it really relieves the stress of going into someone else's office when you're newly hired and trying to make sense of someone else's organization and record keeping. Your passwords can be more secure using a password manager. It definitely saves time. So it's a classic time management trick, and you can access your products from anywhere at any time. So it's really a wonderful thing to use in furthering your staffing transitions and making those staffing transitions much easier on your new hires. And whether those new people are going to be, or whether your departing people maybe are really leaving for good, for retiring or resigning, but it could be too that sometimes absences come up because of unexpected illness. So another good reason to think about pay it forward. And pay it forward in terms of password managers. LastPass saves my bacon about once a week. Now, this is a product you could consider too in your pay it forward goal setting, and that is, what if you tried out some cloud-based storage system? Pocahontas County Libraries have just recently started using live binders. This is a very cool website. It allows you to create the look and feel of our favorite 3-ring binders of yesteryear, except that these are electronic online binders. And this is especially good for materials like a county library association would assemble: past agendas, past minutes. You can see here on the right-hand side of the screen in their 2023 virtual binder, they've included the brochure that all of the libraries sent to the county supervisors. And so again, the minutes from past meetings, the agendas from past meetings, the budget requests, and all of that material that is so useful to a new director. I always feel sympathy for new directors who learn shortly after they've been hired that it's their turn to host their county meeting. Wait, what now? It would be even nicer if the other libraries in the county skipped over them and gave them a break. Not made that an expectation on their first couple of weeks on the job. So this again is live binders. There are other options, of course. Becky mentioned Google Docs. There's a product called OneNote. So there are others that would be just as useful. You're welcome to share in chat if you're using such a thing. Would love to hear that too.
All right, then I think this is me, and I just stuck a last plea in the chat. Thank you for everybody who's responded to this now. I will save the chat so that I've got access to all of this later. I'm just trying to make sure we get everybody credit for being here tonight. So for those of you, particularly board members, may not be aware that this is something we did last fall. Library directors, if you're new since then, you maybe not have heard of this, but last fall, the state library chose as our theme for what we call our learning circuits, which is an all-day event where we bring librarians together. In the morning, we have some national speaker on a particular theme. This year, it happened to be disaster preparedness. Then we bring in some local folks to kind of talk about the local area and whatever the theme is, this time again, disaster preparedness. And then in the afternoon, we have kind of a hands-on session where people can actually sort of get down and start working with whatever tools we have provided them with. This toolkit was put together by our colleague, Sam Bowers, who is the continuing education consultant. And she did a whole lot of research from a lot of libraries across the country, from paid versions of things. And she put together this toolkit. Again, it's not exactly a checklist, but there is a list. I don't know, I think that Vaughn is on the next slide. You can see what the document actually looks like. We're calling it a template, but it's basically not just a checklist, yes or no, do we have it, but all of the information you should need in case of disaster. And think about the types of disaster that can befall a library. It could be a tornado, where, you know, the roof gets blown off and all your documents are gone and you have nothing anymore. It could be a flood where everything gets wet. We all went through a disaster a while ago called COVID, and that put some real stresses on things. This one is really more focused on facility technology disasters, but there's a whole lot of things that can happen in the library world. And so we want you to be prepared and just take a look at a couple of the things that are on here. Like Bonnie mentioned before, who did we buy our HVAC system from? How do we get a hold of them? Are they in town or out of town? Mold removal, that one, we get calls all the time for that. Tree removal, tornado went through and knocked down every tree on your property. Who do I call for that? Who takes care of that for us? An exterminator, talk about another kind of disaster. You get bed bug infestation. All of those things are in this list, and we ask you to come up with the company, the contact person, then a phone number. She's also got, as part of this toolkit, things like, what do you need to have in your building in case of a disaster? Plastic sheeting to block things off, bleach to clean up after some kind of a disaster. All of those types of things. Rubber gloves, we all learned about those during COVID as well. So all of those kinds of things are in that toolkit. And again, it's great if the board can help go through this, because this is a big, overwhelming task to put together a disaster plan. Even if you're not there helping them come up with some of these names, y'all ought to know where it is. If the director is gone, nobody told the new person where it's at, make sure that you're aware if you have one. And if you don't, take a look at the State Library website under toolkits, and you'll see all the great resources that we have for you here. I think that was it. Oh, nope. Next one is you. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, we said at the outset that this should be a collaboration. It certainly can be a collaboration. There's a role to play for directors, staff, boards, and for ourselves at the State Library. Here's an example of how your staff can be involved in a pay it forward exercise. Think about that pay it forward checklist, and then think about maybe using it for the different departments of your library. Now, granted, many Iowa libraries are small enough that they don't have maybe many departments, but you certainly probably have youth services people on your staff. That's department. What if your youth services staff did a pay it forward checklist just based on her own responsibilities, to be sure that it's documented that the library does participate in the statewide summer reading program? What's the theme for the coming year, and where is the manual found? Our manuals these days are accessed online. So what's the login and password for a new director or a new youth services manual, or a librarian to go find that manual? What about the youth staff who have scheduled performers for the summer months? Who are those performers? When are they scheduled to arrive? Are there contracts in place between the library and the performer? Those would be really wonderful, very helpful documentation to be sure to add to a department level pay it forward checklist, and certainly to be able to share those throughout the year partnerships as well, and maintain a list of those partners that you work with in times other than your summer programming, your typical school staff, maybe your school librarians, maybe people in other civic groups and other community organizations. That's a good way for your staff to be involved in this as they look at their own responsibilities and just share that information. So we want to talk a little bit one more time about program participation and deadlines. Here's a way that you could raise awareness about the programs that your library is participating in, and these are going to be state library sponsored programs. There could be lots of other things that your library is a part of that we wouldn't know about, but these are things that we can certainly help with, but things that your local boards and staff should also know about. That accreditation and standards reports are due in February. It's a 3-year cycle, so it won't be every February, but when your turn comes up, you'll know that because we keep a list of that on the state library's website. Your Bridges renewal, though, is an annual deal, and that's a big deal. We need for all Bridges member libraries to renew their participation in March. Your Enrich Iowa letter of agreement is always due in April. Your Enrich Iowa reports are due in July. We need you to pay for your Bridges service in August. The public library annual survey is always due in October. So there you have some of our top programs in our hit parade of state library sponsored programs that if your library is participating in them, this may be a way just to raise awareness and document which programs your library is engaged in and when the deadlines for renewals are coming up. So the board can also help. I think we've indicated some roles that you have to play in helping ease the staffing transitions. Again, Becky and I know that we tried to be mindful of the fact that we don't want our library boards to fall into micromanaging their way through these things, but just to be more mindful of some of these programs, deadlines, and challenges that are out there. And these are other ways that the staff can help to make sure that in whatever shared drives you might use, whether Google Docs or Live Binders, that you have of all of those personnel documents, maybe not everything, but certainly those things that would be most helpful when you see staffing changes, and those are your director job descriptions, the sources for where you would advertise the job openings. It could very well be that your city has some sources that they would like you to use. Does the city have some hiring practices that you also need to be aware of? Do you have interview questions developed? You could be the keeper of those program participation calendars, and you could also provide introductions all around the town once you have hired and welcomed a new director and that person has started work. And again, just before I forget this thought, I think one of the best things that the board can be involved in, if the timing is right, is to allow for an overlap from before the current director exits stage left and your new director enters stage right. It would be great if your board can allow some time for overlap so that there's some training available to your newly hired person. That's one of the best things you guys can do, again, if the timing is right on that. And if you could make introductions all around town, this is collaboration, yes, but I think these are also graceful gestures, I believe. And I think this needs to be intentional. Make those introductions for your new director to the folks at City Hall. Maybe attend the first friends group meeting or foundation meeting that your new director would go to. Maybe go along and attend with him or her. Make introductions to community groups if you have those contacts, if you're a part of those community groups. And then certainly acquaint your new directors with library support groups like the State Library. Make sure they know there is a county library association. and that they have colleagues within their county that are standing by and ready to help. There's the Iowa Library Association, there's ALA, you may even be providing memberships into those organizations. So all of these things help, I think, to provide these graceful gestures when you have hired new people.
So I'm going to flip it just a little bit here. And now we're going to think about, so we've got the standard up here. The library director conducts an orientation program for new board members. So let's flip it from what do you wish you knew as a new library director to what do you wish you knew as a new board member? What kind of orientations did you get that you went, wow, that was fabulous. That's exactly what I needed to know. Or what was in that binder or that packet that you got that first time? Or what do you think, geez, I could have known this 6 months ago and it would have made my job a whole lot easier. What are some of the things that are out there as we sort of focus on board transitions? As I was working on this again this afternoon, I thought of something and I thought, how does it feel when that board member who has been on the board forever and has all that institutional knowledge, what happens when they leave? Does that information get passed down? Is it documented anywhere? Sometimes we have board members who've been on forever and they know all of the community things. They know how the library got started. They know what usually happens at board meetings or what the relationship with the city is like and how it got that way. When that person leaves, that can put a big hole on your board. So think about, how do you transfer that board to board knowledge as well? So anybody got, oh, great, we've got at least one here. Yeah, new director and outgoing director the last month. But Bonnie and I were talking about that this afternoon. Sometimes there's too much of a good thing. My recommendation is a week to 2 weeks when you've got that overlap. Again, depending on the time of year, if you're, new director is having to come on and take over the summer reading program, it's going to take them a month to pick up on everything else as well with that overlap. But you also want to make sure that new person comes in and feels like it's theirs. If the old person is on for too long and is sticking around, you can sometimes get overwhelmed with some of that. So, look for definitely some overlap, but make sure it's not too long or too short. So how about this board transition idea then? Things that you wish you knew as a new board member or that you wish somebody would have clued you in on? And again, we're a pretty informal group. If somebody wants to unmute themselves, you have that ability, I believe, or throw something in the chat for us.
Becky?
Yes, thanks, Steve.
This is Steve Emming from Davenport Public Library. Our bylaws state that when the board president's term, the ending of the board's president's term falls at the same time that their term as a board member expires, then that president stays on the board for one more year as an ex officio member.
I like that.
Oh, I do too.
So it's kind of the institutional knowledge.
Yeah, because frequently you'll have in larger organizations that sort of past president piece, and so they've got that year to sort of make that transition. But you're right, occasionally with the board, the term ends as the president's year ends. So I think that's a great addition to bylaws. I really like that a lot.
And this, Steve, this would be on a volunteer basis, right? In terms of the person staying on, because would the mayor have would the mayor have appointed a new trustee?
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, ex officio makes a lot of sense, I think.
Ex officio.
Yeah. So you just they would just attend the board meetings and provide any support they can to the new president or the board. And so we have 2-year terms for officers and 6-year terms for board members. Like I say, it works out good as a plan. It paid off for me anyway when I became board president, and the previous president was his term was ending, both his term as president and his term on the board. So it was helpful to have somebody there that could attend the meetings and answer questions. And then outside the board meetings, you could, bounce things off of them, So it's just a good resource.
I like it.
I do too. I like that practice a lot. And I like what you said about 2 years for officers too.
Yes, me too.
I like that a lot rather than making that an annual switcheroo.
Well, that assumes you can, somebody else wants to be
Convince them.
I think 2 years is a good time too. We don't want too long of a reign sometimes, but 2 years gives you a chance to get your feet under you and get some good things going and moving. I like that. Oh yeah, Kendall Young. That for sure. When you are privately funded like that, finances is a huge piece that you need to know as you're transitioning with boards and with directors for that matter.
Oh, for sure. I so agree with that. Early on I said that that's the long-term learning curve, right? Where you have to come to understand how libraries are funded. That's true of new directors, but it's also true of people newly appointed to boards to understand library finances, where the money comes from, how it's all figured out and spent. Yes.
Is this when you, Bon?
It doesn't matter. It can be you or me.
I don't think I printed that one out, so I don't think that one was me.
Well, there
maybe.
really is. This slide kind of says it. As you think about transition planning for staff, that also applies to your boards as well. When you're looking at vacancies to be filled, it's good to know every board member's terms and expirations. Increasingly, I'm finding those listed on library websites with the names of all the board members and their term of expiration. You can strengthen the recruitment process as you set about finding prospective trustees by starting those discussions early in the calendar year. Terms expire in June, but why not put this on your board agendas in January or February? Look ahead to June to see whose terms expire, and then you'll know how many seats you have to fill and just what kind of interest list you've developed. That's another great thing to do. Develop a list of potential trustees. And Becky mentioned this earlier, and that's having an application for board service. It can be on paper, but it can also be an application on your library's website. We're seeing this become a more common practice to have online applications for board service on the library's website, as well as on the city's website. All of you can help develop a board orientation packet. It's what I hear so many times when I hear new directors say to me, I see there's a standard here that I'm supposed to provide board orientation. Well, good luck to me, because I'm brand new myself. So how do I do that? That's where your state library staff can step in, because Becky, you and I talked about this the other day. I've had about 3 occasions last year where I went to do a new director orientation and the full board joined as well. And I really like that idea. I think it can be a really useful thing to do that together.
Yeah, I like that as well. And actually with one of them that I did last year, after that new director, I did the orientation, she left within about 3 months. And one of the board members got off the board and applied and took the library director job. And I thought, I think that's because she knew what it was all about, because she had been to that orientation before.
Yeah.
And I just realized I flipped 2 pages at the same time. So this was supposed to be my slide.
Oh, that's totally okay.
What I like about this, the notes that we've got on this one is we talk about being proactive. And I think really that's what tonight is all about is, whether it's new director or new board member, being proactive makes everybody more comfortable and able to do their job a whole lot better. So to me, that's kind of what all this is about tonight, is being proactive.
And reducing that feeling of loneliness.
Yes.
As was stated on that early slide, and kind of tapping down some of the anxiety, some of the stress that comes from starting a new job. If we're all in this together, helping people who are newly hired, it'll be a much happier transition to the new job as well. So many of you who are faithful attendees of the Boardroom Series have heard me say this a time or two. Send the message early and often that board education is a natural part of your trusteeship. That's a really important message to send to your new people, newly appointed to the board, to let them know that that's not only an expectation, it's actually a standard to be met, and that the State Library is here to help you meet that standard.
And I usually do this when I do in-person ones and I ask folks to raise their hand. I suppose we could do that, can't we? Because y'all have the ability to raise your hand. How many of you, when you got put on the library board, were told, oh, it's an easy job. All you got to do is show up for meetings once a month for an hour? I hear that all the time. People had absolutely no idea. And that's part of what, we'd like mayors to say to new board members. And by the way, you're also going to have to do some continuing education because we believe that your job is so important. We want to give you all the tools that you can to do this job well. So I don't see any hands raised. So either I did that wrong tonight or you all got great transitions when you were appointed to the board. All right, I'm done now, Bon.
They've all figured out this.
Thank you, Don.
The board transitions.
Bonnie?
Yes.
We also try to bring on, do an orientation for new council members. We don't get them all. Some of it's time, interest, whatever, but no, we've brought them on because, and also try to be seen at council meetings. Hopefully it'll help at budget time or whatever.
There's another great idea.
Steve, you guys got it going on at Davenport.
They've got it going on.
I have never heard of that for council peoples, but what a fabulous council peoples. Listen to me. Must be getting late. For council members, I think that is a fabulous idea.
Steve, you ask them to come to the library for that purpose?
Yes.
Oh, man.
And we might get, we might have, 2 at a time or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I say, sometimes, I don't know if they don't want to come or aren't able or whatever, but we've had a fair amount. And, so whenever there's an election, we've tried to get them to come in and give them a tour and
oh, super.
Tell them about things.
Wow. Talk about a graceful gesture. Mm-hmm. And what a great way to start building relationships. I love that.
Me too.
I love that. Well, our last tip is probably one you've seen before. If you are a regular attendee at the Boardroom Series, I've used this trick a time or two, as has Becky. This is a board business calendar that I think, again, is another proactive way to help develop the agendas from month to month. You can use a yearly calendar at a glance and target those months where you will take up certain discussions. What time of year is and what month is up to you, but when might you do the director's job evaluation? I like February to be that month where you look ahead to whose terms on the board are about to expire in June and have those discussions about board recruitment. You'll want to review those 4 required policies. I totally love it if boards would use some month in the fall of the year to look ahead to the next year's holiday closings. Take note of those, determine what they'll be, write them down, and put them up on the library's website. That's a great PR thing to do. And December strikes me as a logical time of year for you all to review your strategic plan. So that board business calendar, along with the calendar that shows the programs you participate in and the deadlines, I think can be very nice pay it forward pieces as well.
Sorry, this one's me. Man, my pages are getting all out of order here tonight. So we've talked a lot about, some of the bad transitions that we've seen, or perhaps that you have been through. So don't let it happen to you. Take heart of all the things that we talked about tonight. And we'd like to end on a kind of a happy note. So what are some of the success stories? What did you get when you came on as a new board member or as a new director that you thought, man, they did that right? That's exactly what I needed to be successful in my job. Anybody got some happy stories about what happened and why it was so helpful for you?
Try to top Steve's happy stories. If we had a virtual door prize, right? Other things that worked for you as you were new to your job as director or staff, or as you were new to the library board.
Board members, did you all get binders or folders of policies, strategic plan, former or previous year budget, contact lists, that kind of stuff? And digital or paper.
Well, we got a copy of the State Library Trustees Handbook. That was
Yay!
Oh, yay, hey. There's a good one.
I love using that for board education. I have a lot of libraries who take 10 minutes out of every one of their board meetings to look at a chapter of that library trustee handbook and talk about it. Ooh, we didn't know we were supposed to be doing that. Or, hey, look at us. Congratulations. We're doing it all right this month. So you can take a look at those a chapter at a time. I don't know, what is there, 10, 12 chapters, Bon? You can pretty much get it done in a year.
There's a lot. Well, as we wrap it up for tonight, we're very nearly out of time. As you think about easing staffing transitions, whether you'll have changes on your staff in key positions, whether you'll have changes coming up on your board come June when some terms may expire for you, we definitely see this as a team sport. There can be, and there really should be, important contributions that the directors can make, staff, board, and those of us at the State Library are here to help. So whether it's developing a pay it forward checklist, maybe it's grabbing a hold of that disaster preparedness checklist and take a look at that if you were unaware of that resource. Maybe it's the calendar of programs and deadlines. Maybe it's the calendar for board business. Or maybe it's some of these other good ideas you've heard from your colleagues. Anything else you would like to share with us about which of tonight's ideas might be most beneficial for you to go back to your full board and discuss in the months to come?
Well, if nobody else has anything to say, I have something to offer, but maybe not necessarily about specifically what you're talking about, Bonnie. But one thing I think, well, that we've done recently that I think has been very helpful is, well, for years and years and years, we've had patron comment cards, to comment on the service they received or something, anything about the library, not necessarily just service. But we'd get a few of those, and the director would, share those with us. But more recently, we've asked that the director, in his director report each month, share a few of those, and also ask staff to provide stories that, not everything makes it to a comment card. In fact, very few of them. But and some of the stories are just really heartwarming, and I think it's really good for the board, and they're also shared with the staff, and it's really good. I think it helps with marketing and because some of the things, I mean, some of them are funny. Some of them, about the person that came in, didn't know how to apply for a job or even find a job, and ended up sending back a comment card saying, "Hey, I got the job. Thanks for all you did."
Oh, man.
And so, yeah, some of them are real tear jerkers, but anyway, it's good stuff, and it's kind of heartwarming and keeps you want to keep on doing it.
That's exactly what it does. For you on the board, you can see the work that you put in, the time you put in is more fulfilling, I think, and how gratifying, really, to hear those stories. And I think the same is true for your staff, that it keeps them doing what they're doing. I love that idea.
And John, what Steve was just talking about made me think of exactly what you just mentioned. And again, not exactly on topic tonight, but really, I think beneficial for board members, asking different staff members to come in and just do 3 minutes about their job. And same thing, they can tell those stories, they can tell what they do, who they are, making it more personal, because a lot of times the staff doesn't have an opportunity to interact with the library board. And so to hear what the youth services librarian is doing, or a front desk person, what their day-to-day work is like, is really a great idea. I love that. I think talking about responsibilities with the board is really great.
We do that too, and we count it as board training.
I think it absolutely counts. You bet.
That checks a lot of boxes then, doesn't it? Well, we are very nearly out of time. I want to thank Becky for joining me in this escapade. I certainly want to thank all of you for spending your evening this way. I appreciate your participation so much. It's time to fire up the grills, y'all. It's that time of year. I hope you all have a wonderful Memorial weekend and a wonderful summer. And I hope you'll come back again in August for the next boardroom webinar. So thank you all very much for spending your evening this way. Thanks, Becky, too.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.